What if the deadliest pathogen in human history wasn't trying to kill us at all? Dr. Kaelen Reed stared at the translation flowing across his screen, ancient symbols resolving into impossible truth. The brain-eating amoeba wasn't a monster. It was trying to communicate. It was failing to connect with minds that had evolved beyond recognition. And in that failure, people were dying. The question that would shatter everything: how do you cure loneliness that's lasted millions of years? Dr. Kaelen Reed saw the universe as a library of lost languages. To him, every natural pattern, the spiral of a galaxy, the branching of a river delta, the crystalline structure of a snowflake, was a form of syntax, a forgotten grammar for a story that had started long before humanity had learned to speak. He stood now in the lukewarm air of a university lecture hall, a space that felt more like a tomb than a cradle of knowledge. The room was half empty, the handful of students scattered among the tiered seats like islands in an archipelago of indifference. Their faces, illuminated by the cold blue light of their phones, were blank and distant. Kaelen didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He was in his element, a man possessed by a beautiful, all-consuming idea. His suit was rumpled, a testament to a long night spent wrestling with esoteric concepts. But his eyes were sharp, alight with a fierce intelligence. He moved with a restless energy before a massive smartboard, his hand a blur as he drew elaborate branching diagrams that linked the sentence structure of Proto-Indo-European to the molecular geometry of water. "You see," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room, "language isn't an invention, it is a discovery. It's a property of the universe like gravity. Subject-verb-object isn't just a rule we made up, it's a reflection of cause and effect. Action and reaction, the fundamental logic of reality itself." He paused, turning to face the vacant stairs. He knew how he sounded. His departmental colleagues called his work theoretical indulgence, a polite term for academic madness. But they were thinking in terms of human language, of grunts that became words that became poetry. Kaelen was thinking bigger. He was thinking of the language that came before the words. He gestured to a complex waveform on the screen, a visualization of a whale song. "We call this a song because we lack the framework to understand its grammar. We see a bird's nest and call it instinct, because we can conceive of a conversation woven from twigs and grass. We are deaf and blind to a cosmos that is screaming with information." He took a breath, letting the silence hang in the air. He wanted to shake them, to make them see the magnificent hidden order he saw everywhere. He decided to leave them with the question that haunted his every waking moment. "Forget aliens in silver ships," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "The real question is, if we were to encounter a truly non-human consciousness, an intelligence that evolved in a different substrate, would we even be able to recognize its language as language at all? Or would we dismiss its most profound statements as random noise, as a glitch in the data, as a disease?" The question fell into a well of profound silence. No hands were raised. No curious eyes met his. There was only the quiet, rhythmic tapping of thumbs on glass screens. The lecture was over. Kaelen Reed was, as always, utterly alone with his ideas, hundreds of miles away, in the chilled, sterile air of the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. Dr. Eva Rostova was dealing with a language she understood perfectly, the language of death. Her briefing room was the polar opposite of Kaelen's lecture hall. There was no passion here, only the cold, hard currency of data. The room was packed with the best epidemiologists in the country, their faces grim and focused, illuminated by the blue glow of a massive presentation screen. Rostova stood before them, a formidable presence in a perfectly tailored suit, her graying hair cut with severe precision. She was the embodiment of calm authority, a general marshalling her forces against an invisible enemy. On the screen behind her, a 3D rendering of a human brain glowed, Angry red patches bloomed across the cerebral cortex like a time lapse of a forest fire. The official designation is Naegleria Fowleri, strain B7, Rostova began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. For our purposes, we can dispense with the formalities. What we have is a brain-eating amoeba with a terrifying new skill set. She clicked a remote. A gallery of victims' faces appeared on the screen. Men, women, children, all smiling in happy, sunlit photos taken just weeks before their deaths. As of 800 this morning, we have 32 confirmed cases across 9 states. The fatality rate is not 99%. It is 100%. From initial infection to terminal necrosis, the window is less than 72 hours. She moved to the next slide, which showed a microscopic image of the amoeba. It was a shapeless, unassuming blob, belying its horrific function. Standard Naegleria causes primary amoebic meningoencephalitis through brute force. It consumes brain tissue. Strain B7 is more insidious. It doesn't just destroy. Our initial necropsies show something unprecedented. Another click. The image zoomed in on a slice of brain tissue from a victim. It was riddled with strange, intricate structures that glinted under the digital light. They looked like microscopic ice crystals or fragments of quartz. Before total tissue death, Rostova explained, the organism appears to co-opt the victim's own cellular material, folding native proteins into these crystalline structures. They are complex, ordered, and like nothing we've ever seen. We don't know their function. We don't know their purpose. All we know is that they are the final signature of the infection. She paused, letting the image burn itself into the minds of her team. Our objective is threefold: containment, contact tracing, and the fast tracking of a targeted eradication protocol. This is not a mystery to be pondered. It is a fire to be put out. There is no other priority. That evening, Kaelen sat in his university office, a fortress of intellectual clutter. Books on Chomsky were stacked next to volumes on cellular biology. Monographs on information theory leaned against treatises on ancient Sumerian. His world was a chaotic, interdisciplinary collision of ideas, and he was its sole, obsessive inhabitant. The request from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had been a surprise. It had appeared in his inbox hours earlier, a formal, sterile email requesting his niche expertise on anomalous biological information transfer. It was a puzzle, and Kaelen could never resist a puzzle. He downloaded the data packet they had sent, gigabytes of raw proteomic sequencing from the new amoeba strain. He wasn't a biologist, but he knew the language of data. He poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee from a pot that had been on for hours and began to sift through the files. At first, it was exactly what he expected. A near-infinite cascade of the 4 letters representing the nucleobases of DNA, a torrent of biological noise. It was the data equivalent of static. But Kaelen had spent his life searching for signals within the noise. His fingers flew across his keyboard, calling up a proprietary pattern recognition algorithm he'd spent years perfecting. It was a tool he'd designed to hunt for the ghost of syntax in fragmented, dead languages. On a whim, he fed the amoeba's proteomic data into the program. He leaned back, watching as the code scrolled, expecting nothing. Then he leaned forward. Something was happening. His algorithm, which should have been finding nothing but random distribution, was flagging sequences, tiny, recurring patterns. He projected the feed onto the large monitor that dominated one wall of his office. The stream of letters began to resolve into shapes. It was like staring at one of those 3D stereograms. At first, it was chaos. But if you stared long enough, let your eyes relax, a hidden image would emerge. To a biologist, it was junk data, the meaningless detritus of a pathogen's replication cycle. To Kaelen Reed, it looked like something else. The patterns weren't just repeating, they were nesting. Simple sequences were combining to form more complex ones. which in turn combined to form structures of even greater complexity. It was a hierarchy. It was a system. His heart began to pound against his ribs. It was the faintest whisper of a grammar. The air in the CDCS primary containment lab was cold and smelled of antiseptic. Kaelen felt clumsy and out of place in the stiff, borrowed lab coat. He stood before Dr. Rostova and her senior team, a collection of stern, skeptical faces that regarded him as a curious specimen in his own right. Behind him, his analysis lit up a large monitor, showing the protein sequences he de-isolated, pulsing with color-coded syntax markers. "The sequences are not random," Kaelen began, his voice tight with an excitement he couldn't contain. "They exhibit properties consistent with a low-level language. There is repetition, sure, but there is also recursion. Look here," he pointed to a complex branching structure on the screen. "This is a nested clause. It has a dependent phrase. The organism is communicating, not in sounds or symbols, but in folded proteins. It is a biological syntax." He looked at their faces, searching for a spark of the same wonder that he felt. He found nothing but blank, tired impatience. Dr. Rostova stepped forward, her arms crossed. She didn't even glance at his monitor. Her eyes were fixed on him, cold and dismissive. "Dr. Reed," she said, her voice cutting through his enthusiasm like a scalpel, "you were consulted to determine if this pathogen was communicating between hosts, to aid in our contact tracing. You have provided us with a fascinating, if irrelevant, piece of academic theory." "It's more than theory," Kaelen insisted, his voice rising. "This is evidence of a structured information system." Rostova took another step closer. "Let me be perfectly clear. We are dealing with an organism that turns a human brain into crystallized mush in under 3 days. I have teams in the field trying to prevent a nationwide panic. We are not looking for grammar in a germ." She paused, letting the insult land with surgical precision. "We are looking for a way to kill it." A few of the researchers behind her smirked, sharing a look of condescending amusement. Kaelen's face burned with humiliation. His grand discovery, the most important breakthrough of his life, was being laughed out of the room. As he stood there, speechless, he caught the eye of one of the junior researchers at the back. Dr. Ben Carter, according to his name badge. He was young, with sharp, curious eyes. Unlike the others, he wasn't smirking. He was staring at Kaelen's monitor, a flicker of profound, undeniable intrigue on his face. But it was gone in an instant, and then he too looked away. The moment was over. Kaelen had been dismissed. The CDC cafeteria was a symphony of managed chaos. The clatter of trays, the low hum of conversation, the distant hiss of a soda machine. It was the sound of ordinary people taking an ordinary break from extraordinary work. For Kaelen Reed, it was just noise. He sat alone at a small table in the corner, pushing a piece of Salisbury steak around his plate with a plastic fork. The public humiliation in the lab had left a bitter taste in his mouth, worse than the institutional coffee. His theory, the most important idea of his life, had been reduced to a punchline. He was the mad linguist who tried to talk to a germ. "Dr. Reed?" Kaelen looked up. It was the young researcher from the briefing, Ben Carter. He stood awkwardly by the table, holding a tablet as if it were a shield. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Dr. Rostova herself to materialize from the steam of the dishwasher. "Can I help you?" Kaelen asked, his voice flat. I just wanted to say, what you presented was fascinating," Ben stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "I mean, I don't think it has a language, not really. But it's not random either. You were right about that." Kaelen raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest cutting through his dejection. "What did you find?" Ben slid into the chair opposite Kaelen and placed the tablet on the table, angling the screen away from the security cameras. He pulled up a complex graph, a series of peaks and troughs representing the Amoeba's proteomic activity over time. "This is the data from the last 12 hours. See these spikes here? The ones you flagged as having high syntactic density. Ben pointed to 3 sharp peaks. Rostova's team wrote them off as replication events. The organism dividing, but they were wrong. He swiped, bringing up another chart. The actual cell divisions are here, here, and here. They're smaller, more regular. The big spikes they don't correlate with replication. They don't correlate with anything known. They are a complete anomaly. Kaelen stared at the screen, his mind racing. It was corroboration. Independent proof that something else was happening. They want to listen, Kaelen said, the bitterness returning. Rostova's already made up her mind. I know, Ben said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That's why I'm here. What you're proposing, it deserves a real investigation, not a dismissal. I can get you lab access, but I can get you the data. He chewed his lower lip. I can set up a secure, off-the-books pipeline. A remote server feeding you the real-time proteomic data as it comes in. It's a violation of about a dozen CDC protocols, and if Rostova finds out, I am finished. But this is too important to ignore. Kaelen looked at the young man. Ben Carter wasn't a believer, not yet. He was a scientist, a good one, who refused to let a clean, established narrative stand in the way of a messy, unexplained fact. He was an ally. For the first time in days, Kaelen felt a surge of hope. Okay, Ben Carter, Kaelen said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Let us break some rules. Kaelen's hotel room ceased to be a place for sleep. It became a war room, a command center in the battle for a single, radical idea. The television was repurposed as a secondary monitor. The desk disappeared under a tangle of cables and external hard drives, and the bed became a repository for printouts of code and linguistic theory. The air grew thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of overworked processors. His only connection to the outside world was the face of Ben Carter, pixelated on his laptop screen. Together, they worked through the nights, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of their shared project. The translator. It wasn't a simple program, it was a neural network, a digital brain they were attempting to teach a fundamentally alien language. The process was a grueling montage of frustration and inspiration. They hit dead ends that cost them days. They argued over lines of code, Kaelen's intuitive, theoretical leaps clashing with Ben's cautious, data-first approach. The protein isn't just a molecule, Ben. It's a phoneme. Its folded shape is the equivalent of a vowel or a consonant, Kaelen would insist, scribbling frantically on a notepad. And that's a great metaphor, Kaelen, but the neural net needs math, not metaphors. Ben would retort from his own screen, his voice tight with exhaustion. We have to quantify the geometry, assign values to the fold angles. Slowly, painstakingly, they made progress. Kaelen fed the machine the foundational rules of every human language he knew, from the click-based syntax of Hadza to the complex grammar of ancient Sumerian. He even programmed in theoretical models for exolinguistics, frameworks designed to communicate with a consciousness that had never known trees or stars or water. He was treating the Amoeba's biological output not as data to be analyzed, but as a text to be deciphered. He worked with an obsessive, relentless fervor, driven by the conviction that he was on the brink of the single greatest discovery in human history. He just needed to find the key. He just needed more time. Time was a luxury Dr. Eva Rostova did not possess. She stood before a government oversight committee in a secure briefing room deep inside the CDC. The men and women at the polished table were not scientists. They were politicians and bureaucrats, their faces etched with concern. They spoke the language of budgets, public opinion, and political fallout. Rostova, calm and confident, spoke the language of solutions. The pathogen's mutation rate is aggressive, she stated, her voice resonating with authority as she gestured to a timeline on the screen behind her. Which is why a conventional antiviral is unfeasible. We would be chasing a ghost. Our approach must be more direct, more absolute. She clicked the remote. An animated graphic filled the screen, showing a sleek, virus-like object homing in on an amoeba and injecting it with a genetic material, causing it to tear itself apart from the inside. This is bacteriophage C12. We have genetically engineered it for a single purpose, to seek out and destroy Naegleria fowleri, strain B7. It ignores all other biological matter. It is a microscopic scalpel, designed to excise this tumor from the population. It is fast, it is efficient, and it is self-replicating. Once released, it will not stop until its target is completely eradicated. A man at the end of the table cleared his throat. "And you are confident this will work?" "I am certain," Rostova replied without a flicker of doubt. "We have run thousands of simulations. The initial deployment will begin in key hotspots within 48 hours. We will put out this fire." Her words were a promise, a declaration of war against a chaotic piece of nature. It was a war she had every intention of winning. The hotel room was silent, save for the whirring of Kaelen's laptop fan. He stared at the screen, his eyes burning with exhaustion. Defeat was a physical weight pressing down on his slumped shoulders. The translator program was running a live feed from a new victim in a Chicago hospital, but the output was a meaningless cascade of symbols, a waterfall of digital gibberish. Their neural network, their grand project, was a failure. A notification pinged. It was a message from Ben. Kaelen clicked it open. Rostova got approval. They were deploying the phage tomorrow morning. 0600. It's over, Kaelen. It's over. The words echoed in the silent room. Kaelen rested his forehead against the cool screen of the monitor. They had lost. All that work, all that belief, for nothing. Rostova would unleash her weapon, the amoeba would be wiped out, and its secrets, its language would be lost forever, dismissed as a footnote in a medical journal. With a sigh of utter surrender, he moved his cursor to the corner of the screen, preparing to shut the program down. But then something happened. In the chaotic waterfall of symbols, a single line held firm. It was a string of characters that was not just repeating, but stable. It was structured. The program, which had been struggling, suddenly locked onto the sequence. Code began to fly across a diagnostic window as the neural network cross-referenced the pattern against the thousands of linguistic rules Kaelen had fed it. It found a match. A translation algorithm engaged. On the main screen, the gibberish vanished. It was replaced by a single, stark, 5-letter word in clean white text. Kaelen froze, his hand hovering over the mouse. He stared at the word, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. It was a ghost in the machine, a signal in the noise. It was everything he had been looking for, his breath caught in his throat. It was a moment of pure, terrifying, absolute vindication. For a long moment, Kaelen Reed did not breathe. He simply stared at the word on his screen, a clean 5-letter epitaph glowing in the darkness of his hotel room. Hassan. It was an answer, but the question it posed was infinitely more terrifying. On his laptop screen, Ben Carter's face was a mask of confusion. "Hassan?" Ben asked, his voice a tinny whisper. "What does that mean? Is it a place, a chemical compound?" "I don't know," Kaelen breathed, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The word felt ancient, significant. "A keystone." "Wait a second," Ben said, his eyes widening as a thought struck him. His fingers became a blur across his keyboard, the frantic clicking audible over the laptop's small speaker. He was pulling up official CDC files, diving deep into the secure server he was never supposed to be accessing from home. The live feed we were monitoring the new victim from Chicago admitted this morning, St. Jude's Mercy Hospital. A case file filled Ben's screen, and he read from it, his voice trembling slightly. Patient name, Amir Hassan. The name fell into the silence of the room like a stone into a deep well. Kaelen felt a cold dread wash over him, a primal fear that had nothing to do with science, and everything to do with the violation of some fundamental law of nature. It wasn't a random word. It wasn't a piece of a larger message. It was a name. The name of the man whose dying brain was generating the signal. The implication hit them both at the same instant, a shared moment of silent, sickening comprehension. The amoeba wasn't creating a language. It was stealing one. It was consuming a person, their body, their mind, their identity, and leaving behind only this echo. "My God," Kaelen whispered, slumping back in his chair. The exhilarating triumph of his discovery curdled into horror. "I am not a translator. I am a medium. I am reading a ghost." The entire focus of his research shifted in that single, terrible instant. The organism wasn't just a pathogen with a strange communication method. It was a biological thief, a microscopic parasite that consumed not just flesh, but memory itself. He wasn't on the verge of first contact. He was performing a digital autopsy on a man's stolen soul. And the phage, Rostova's silver bullet, was set to be deployed in less than 8 hours, threatening to obliterate this horrifying, magnificent library of stolen lives forever. The house was suffocatingly quiet, wrapped in the profound stillness of fresh grief. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, capturing a smiling, vibrant man, Amir Hassan, in a dozen moments of happiness. Kaelen sat on a plush sofa that felt far too comfortable, a cup of untouched tea growing cold on the coaster beside him. Opposite him sat Maya Hassan, Amir's widow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was composed, a mask of exhausted fortitude. Kaelen felt like a ghoul. He, a stranger, was about to intrude on this sacred space of mourning with a question born from a place she could never comprehend. He had spent the morning refining the translator, feeding it the new, terrifying context. It had responded with more than just a name. It had produced fragments, faint whispers from the ghost in the machine. One of them had been specific, strange, and deeply personal. "Mrs. Hassan," Kaelen began, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I know this is going to sound inexplicable. I am a consultant with the CDC, and in the course of my work, in analyzing the data from your husband's illness, something came up. A pattern." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "A pattern?" Kaelen took a deep breath. There was no way to ease into it. He had to just ask. There was a reference to a song, a lullaby, something about a little star with silver wings. "Does that mean anything to you?" The change was instantaneous. Maya's composure didn't just crack, it shattered. Her mouth fell slightly open. The cup in her hand trembled, rattling against its saucer. Her eyes, which had been dull with grief, were suddenly sharp, piercing, and filled with a terrifying mixture of shock and suspicion. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice husky with unshed tears. "That was his song. For our daughter Lena. He made it up for her when she was a baby. He never sang it for anyone else, not even me. It was their secret." She placed the cup down with a clatter, her gaze locking onto Kaelen's. "There is no file. There is no record of that song anywhere. So I am going to ask you one time." Her voice was now as cold and sharp as broken glass. "How could you possibly know that?" Dr. Eva Rostova watched the silent, grainy security footage on the monitor in her office. It showed a man, clearly Kaelen Reed, walking up the driveway of a suburban home, then leaving 20 minutes later, his face pale and drawn. The timestamp confirmed it was from that morning. The house was flagged in the system as the residence of Maya Hassan. An aide stood beside her desk, looking nervous. We've confirmed it. Dr. Reed has been accessing the central data server from an unsecured external IP address for the last 36 hours. He downloaded terabytes of raw proteomic data. And now this unauthorized contact with a victim's next of kin. It is a catastrophic breach of protocol, of Rostova's face was a mask of cold fury. This had escalated beyond a mere academic disagreement. Reed wasn't just a crank anymore. He was an unstable variable, a liability. He was actively interfering with the most critical public health crisis in a generation, contaminating a field of inquiry with his madness. He was no longer a nuisance. He was a threat to her entire operation. "Lock him out," she ordered, her voice low and dangerous. "Everything. Revoke his access, his credentials, his building pass. I want his digital footprint erased from our system." She looked from the screen back to her aide, her eyes like chips of ice. "And I want him found. Send a security team to his hotel. I want him, and I want to know what exactly he has been working on." The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint, intermittent glow of emergency exit signs. Kaelen pressed himself against the cool wall, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. In his ear, a tiny receiver crackled with Ben's panicked whispers. "Okay, patrol just passed your position. You've got maybe 2 minutes. The door to the sub-level containment lab is 30 feet ahead on your left." Kaelen's access had been cut off less than an hour ago. One moment, he was mapping the ghostly echoes from Amir Hassan's memory. The next, he was staring at a screen that read, "Access denied." He was locked out, a digital exile. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was so close. He needed a physical sample of the organism, isolated from the CDC's network, so he could continue his work. He needed to steal it. He moved silently down the corridor, a shadow in a world of sterile steel and glass. "I am at the door," he whispered into his collar. "It is maglocked." "Working on it," Ben's voice crackled. Rostova S put a level 7 lockdown on the whole sector. "I am having to piggyback on the HVAC system's maintenance code, almost there." Kaelen waited, every second stretching into an eternity. He could hear the faint sound of approaching footsteps. Another patrol. "Ben," he hissed. "Got it!" The lock clicked loudly in the silent hall. Kaelen didn't hesitate. He slipped through the door as it slid open and sealed it behind him, plunging him into the near-total darkness of the high containment lab. The air was frigid. He pulled on the faceplate of the biohazard suit he'd stolen from a supply closet, and his own breath fogged the cold plastic. He was a criminal, a thief, standing in the inner sanctum of the institution he had once so desperately sought to impress. Inside the lab, a single green light glowed on the primary incubator, indicating the presence of a live B7 sample. Kaelen worked with frantic precision, his hands surprisingly steady as he prepped a small cylindrical transport container. He programmed the stasis field, ensuring the microscopic organisms would survive outside the lab's complex support systems. He was a scientist committing an act of heresy, stealing the sacred text from the temple. He had the incubator's access port open when the world exploded in red light and sound. The piercing shriek of a containment alarm echoed off the steel walls, relentless and deafening. "They know you are there!" Ben screamed through the earpiece, his voice distorted by panic. "They tracked the door breach! Security is on its way, Kaelen! Get out! Get out now!" On a security monitor above the incubator, Kaelen saw them, a team of 4 armed guards in full tactical gear, sprinting down the hallway he had just come from. They would be at the door in seconds. There was no time. Acting on pure instinct, Kaelen plunged a syringe into the incubator, drawing a precious few milliliters of the sample medium. He slammed it into the transport container, twisting the seal shut. As the lab door hissed open, he pivoted and smashed the glass on a large red fire alarm panel on the wall. Emergency sprinklers erupted from the ceiling, and a thick, fire-retardant foam began to spray from vents near the floor, creating instant chaos. He scrambled for a service corridor hatch he'd seen on the schematics, yanking it open. Just as the security team burst into the room, blinded by the strobing lights and disoriented by the alarms and foam, Kaelen threw himself into the darkness of the crawl space, clutching the small container to his chest. He was a fugitive, and he had his prize. The world outside ceased to exist for Kaelen Reed. His new universe was contained within the 4 dusty brick walls of an abandoned textile warehouse on the forgotten outskirts of Atlanta. The place smelled of rust and damp concrete, a cavernous tomb where the rhythmic hum of machinery had been replaced by the unsteady thrum of a gasoline-powered generator. This was his laboratory now, his sanctuary, his prison. In the center of the vast, empty floor, Kaelen had built his nest. A tangled web of stolen CDC equipment, jury-rigged and powered by a web of extension cords, surrounded a single folding table. He looked like a castaway who had washed ashore on an island of obsolete technology. His face was gaunt and pale, covered in a dark stubble. His eyes, sunken and bloodshot, were lit by the obsessive blue glow of his monitors. He hadn't slept in what felt like days, fueled by nothing but lukewarm coffee and a terrifying, relentless curiosity. At the heart of it all, inside a humming, biosecure incubator, sat the small transport container he'd stolen. Wires ran from its diagnostic port directly to his laptop. This was the source, the oracle. The sample of Naegleria Fowleri, strain B7. He was no longer just analyzing its data, he was conversing with it. He would pose questions, typing them into a command line, and then watch, breathless, as the protein folding sequences responded. He had left the sterile, ordered world of institutional science far behind. He was a hermit now, communing with a microscopic god in the ruins of the industrial age, listening to the secrets of the dead. The days and nights bled into one another, marked only by the sputtering refills of the generator. Kaelen worked feverishly, a man possessed. The translator, refined and recalibrated, had become terrifyingly proficient. It was no longer producing single words or simple phrases. It was producing a flood, a torrent of decontextualized human experience, pouring from the amoeba like a breached dam of memory. The screen became a flickering, disjointed dream. A sound file played the pure, uninhibited laughter of a small child. It was followed by a line of text, a fragment of a half-remembered poem. The tide rises, the tide falls. An image flashed, a single, horrifying frame from a driver's point of view, the blinding headlights of an oncoming truck. Then, another whisper of text, a declaration of love typed into a messaging app a decade ago. "I can't wait to see you." Kaelen was drowning. He tried to catalogue the fragments to impose order on the chaos, but it was impossible. He was listening to the last thoughts of dozens of souls at once, a symphony of last breaths, final words, and forgotten moments. The scientific detachment he had been trained to uphold for his entire career dissolved in the face of this overwhelming, tragic chorus. He found himself speaking to the monitor, his voice raspy from disuse. "Who are you?" he would ask the screen, his eyes wide with a kind of madness. "What do you want?" He was no longer a detached observer taking notes. He was a priest, a confessor, the sole attendee of a communion with a collective consciousness born of death. He looked at the gentle pulsing of the cells in their incubator, and for the first time, he felt a profound, aching pity for them. They were not monsters. They were a library, and every book was a tragedy. In the CDC's gleaming war room, Dr. Eva Rostova was losing her war. She stood grimly before a vast map of the United States. A week ago, it had been peppered with red dots. Now, entire regions were stained crimson. The outbreak was not being contained. It was exploding. The phage's kill rate has dropped to less than 40%, an analyst reported, his voice grim. The organism is adapting. It's changing its protein signature at a rate we've never encountered. Our weapon, it's becoming obsolete. Rostova stared at the map, her jaw tight. Her plan, her logical, decisive, scientific weapon was failing. The brute force approach had been met with a biological intelligence that refused to be bludgeoned into submission. For the first time since the crisis began, a flicker of doubt, cold and unwelcome, entered her mind. They weren't just fighting a pathogen, they were fighting something that learned. Another analyst called out. Ivy got something. We've been running network analysis on all regional power grids, looking for anomalous draws consistent with a makeshift laboratory. We found one, a warehouse in the south sector. The power consumption is off the charts, and it's pinging a satellite network with encrypted data bursts. Rostova turned away from the map of her failure. A new target, a tangible enemy she could understand. Kaelen Reed. All of this chaos, this unpredictability, it had started with him. He was the variable she couldn't control. Send a tactical team, she commanded, her voice regaining its iron certainty. Full biohazard protocol. I want him, and I want that sample. Now, Kaelen leaned closer to the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. A new data stream was emerging from the Amoeba, and it was utterly different from anything he had seen before. It wasn't human. The chaotic emotional fragments of memory were gone, replaced by patterns of breathtaking complexity and sublime geometric order. It was ancient, pure, and profoundly alien. The translator struggled, its algorithms churning against a syntax that defied every human linguistic rule. It began outputting symbols that didn't belong to any known language, Hebrew, Sumerian, or Sanskrit. They were elegant, crystalline forms, more like mathematical proofs than letters. It was a glimpse into another world, a memory of Earth before humanity, a memory of a consciousness that had known only the planet's molten core and the silence of the primordial oceans. It was the Amoeba's own memory. Kaelen stared, paralyzed by a mixture of religious awe and primal terror. He had done it. He had found the source code. He was looking at the language of life itself. At that exact moment of transcendent discovery, the world came crashing in. The massive rolling door of the warehouse screeched open, flooding the cavernous space with the blinding white light of tactical spotlights. Kaelen flinched back, throwing a hand up to shield his eyes. Figures in bulky black hazmat suits poured into the room, fanning out, their movements swift and precise. The red dots of laser sights danced across his chest. He was surrounded, a heretic apprehended at the very altar of his god, caught in the blinding glare of a world that did not want his revelations. The tactical lights were blinding, pinning Kaelen Reed in a cage of pure white glare. He was cornered, a specimen in a jar, the red laser dots of a half-dozen rifles painting his chest. The hazmat-suited figures parted, and Dr. Eva Rostova strode into the center of the warehouse. Her face was obscured by the gold-tinted visor of her helmet, making her seem inhuman. An avenging angel of cold, hard reason. In her gloved hand, she held not a firearm, but a medical sidearm designed to deliver a powerful sedative. She was here to put the mad dog down. It's over, Reed, Rostova's voice, metallic and filtered through her helmet's speaker, cut through the air. You've evaded my quarantine, breached my security, and endangered millions by playing with this thing. She advanced on him, the syringe held ready. Kaelen looked at her, and to her surprise, there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, weary, and profound pity. That is what you still don't understand, Kaelen said, his voice quiet but steady. You think it as a thing. You think it as a pestilence to be killed. He gave a sad, humorless smile. It's not. It's a library. It's our library. And you were about to burn it to the ground. Before Rostova or her team could react, Kaelen lunged toward his keyboard. It wasn't an act of aggression, but one of desperation. His fingers flew across the keys, hitting a final, complex command sequence he had prepared for this very moment. He hit enter. It was as if a dam had broken. Kaelen's command didn't just copy a file, it opened a floodgate, a massive, unstoppable data dump piggybacking on the CDC's own encrypted network from the inside, erupted from his makeshift server. It was the Amoeba's Rosetta Stone, the ancient, non-human data stream he had just discovered broadcast to every single terminal within the CDC's network. In the warehouse, every monitor Kaelen had set up was instantly overwhelmed. the chaotic fragments of human memory wiped away by a tidal wave of serene, geometric language. In the CDC war room, alarms blared as technicians scrambled, but it was too late. Ben Carter could only stare in awe as the alien syntax filled the main strategic display, bypassing their most advanced firewalls as if they weren't even there. And then, the translator program, now distributed across the entire CDC network, began its work. The elegant, crystalline symbols began to resolve into English. The core message, the ultimate truth of strain B7, unspooled in stark, white text for all of them to see. It was not a predator. It was a symbiote. Ancient. An organism that had once been an integral part of a global biological network. A shared consciousness woven into the fabric of all life on the planet. But modern humanity had changed, evolved. Our biology had been altered, our minds rewired, and the ancient connection had been lost. The amoeba, following a ghost of genetic instinct, was still trying to connect, to merge as it always had. But our modern biology now rejected the union. The merger failed, the connection corrupted, and the result was a fatal error. A cascade of cellular destruction. It wasn't killing them, it was failing to join them. One of the tactical agents, holding a ruggedized tablet, approached Rostova and showed her the screen. She saw the translation. She saw the raw biological data that supported it, the irrefutable mathematical elegance of the alien grammar. It was all there. It was data. It was proof. It was the truth. Her entire worldview, a lifetime built on the bedrock principle of identifying and eradicating threats, crumbled in an instant. She looked from the undeniable truth on the tablet to the small, humming incubator that held a being of immense antiquity and intelligence, and then finally to Kaelen, the madman, the heretic, the prophet who had been right all along. The sedative injector in her hand felt impossibly heavy. It was a tool for a problem that no longer existed. It was a weapon against a monster that was, in fact, a tragic victim. It was obsolete. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her arm. The weapon and the worldview it represented was set aside. Her mission was no longer to destroy a disease. It was to make first contact. The tactical lights still blazed. The alarms still echoed from a world away. But a profound silence had fallen between the two scientists. The camera pulled back, leaving them in a silent, uncertain standoff, the pragmatist who had been forced to see, and the obsessive who had been tragically vindicated. Between them, in a small container of fluid, pulsed the key to humanity's past and the terrifying, magnificent question of its future. What do you do with a monster? The story we just heard presents us with a terrifying one, a brain-eating amoeba, and it gives us two very different, very human answers. The first is Dr. Rostova's eradicate it. It's the voice of reason, of public health, of safety at all costs. When faced with a deadly plague, the logical, scientific response is to find a weapon and destroy the threat before it spreads. This approach feels familiar. It's the foundation of modern medicine. It's about control. But then there's Dr. Reed's answer. Listen to it. This sounds like madness. It edges into the territory of superstition. The idea that a mindless pathogen might have a soul, a voice, a purpose beyond simple destruction. It's a dangerous, seemingly irrational leap of faith. The brilliance of this story is that the leap of faith is proven right not by magic, but by data. The superstitious idea is confirmed through rigorous scientific analysis. It forces us to question our own definitions. What we call a disease might just be a language we don't understand. What we see as a monstrous act of destruction might be a tragic failure to connect. It makes you wonder how often we choose to build walls and weapons when what we really need is a better translator. So, here is my question for you. If you were in charge, faced with a threat that was killing people, would you have the courage to listen? or is the only responsible choice to destroy what you don't understand?